Here we're continuing in our series on the miracles recorded in the book of John. 34 recorded miracles in the New Testament, 7 of them highlighted in the book of John. We're looking at them and working our way through them. Everything from Jesus turning water into wine, seemingly insignificant miracle, but meeting someone in their need at their wedding, saving face for them. We see Jesus work on some people. Last week we talked about him telling the invalid to stand up, pick up his mat, and begin to walk. That the invalid had his hope. He had hope, but it was placed in the wrong place. And that whenever we shift gears, we realize where our hope should actually be. But the theme of this has really been that we don't seek miracles in our lives. We seek the miracle maker. And when we walk with Jesus long enough and close enough, then we see some miracles begin to show up in our lives. In 1939, a guy by the name of George Danzig had enrolled in a statistics class at the University of California at Berkeley. And he shows up to class late one day, and all he sees are the problems that the professor had put on the board. And so he assumes that these are statistics problems that he needs to work on as homework. George was a better student than me. I'm going to need some clarity before I go home and do some homework. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to need to know for sure. But George was an overachiever, so he goes home and he begins to work on these problems, and it takes him several weeks, labor-intensive, grinding away, trying to figure out the answers to the problems, and finally he turns in his homework. And a short time thereafter, he gets a knock on his apartment door, and it's the professor. So George is apologizing because he assumes the professor's there to tell him that his homework was late and he's going to get a big fat F. But in fact, the professor had come to explain to George that he had just solved 3 previously considered unsolvable statistics problems. And through the course of George's life, he goes on and he works for the Department of Defense, and then he becomes an academic professor at Stanford. And around 1975, he actually wins an award for the solutions that he came up with to a homework assignment that wasn't actually homework. You see, George had missed the memo that they were unsolvable problems. He wasn't in class when the professor was explaining that they were unsolvable, and later in his life he said this. He said, if someone had told me that those were 2 famous unsolved problems, I probably wouldn't even have tried to solve them. Henry Ford put it like this. He said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. If you don't believe you can, then you'll never try. You'll never ask. You'll never knock. You'll never seek. You'll never put in the work. You'll never do the things that you need to do to make it possible. But when you believe that you can do something, it's amazing what you accomplish. We talked last week about expectations. And are you living with some expectations for your life every day when you wake up? Are you expecting God to do something great? We're going to look in John chapter 6. Verses 1 through 14, but we're just going to kind of piecemeal our way through this. We're going to read a little, talk a little. Read a little, talk a little. It says, after this, Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A huge crowd followed him, attracted by the miracles they had seen him do among the sick. When Jesus got to the other side, he climbed a hill and sat down, surrounded by his disciples. It was nearly time for the feast of Passover, kept annually by the Jews. When Jesus looked out and saw that a large crowd had arrived, he said to Philip, where can we buy bread to feed these people? Now, I don't know exactly why he's picking on Philip, but Philip was from Bethesda, which was just a few miles away. So maybe Jesus is just asking where the nearest Panera Bread is. But he's looking at Philip and he's saying, how are we going to feed all these people? Now, it's important to understand the economics of the situation here. So there's recorded 5,000 people, but that's men only. So it's estimated that there were upwards of 20,000 people following Jesus. 20,000 people so mesmerized by his miracles, so wanting to be a part of what it is that he has to say, that they're following him, and it's been a long, hard day, and they need something to eat. And Jesus looks over at Philip, and he asks him this question. Goes on in the passage to say, Jesus said this to stretch Philip's faith. He already knew what he was going to do. If you're taking notes, write this down. If you're not taking notes, go ahead and write this down. The test matters. The test matters. We don't really like tests, right? I mean, listen, if you count kindergarten through the end of law school, I went to school for 20 years. For 20 years, I took test after test after test. And after I took the Arkansas bar exam, and then 6 months later, I took the Oklahoma one, I swore I would never take another test. I was done. That was enough. I was good. I was finished. But when you think back on all the tests you take in life, the reason you take them is because there's another level for you to get to. My son Collier's in first grade, and he can't wait to be a teenager. I'm like, just take the first grade test and make it to second grade. If you want a driver's license, you got to take a test. Some people have to take that more than once. It's a struggle. All of the great things that come in life come with a test, though. They come with a little promotion at the end of the acknowledgement that you know what you need to know in this moment. But we struggle with tests. We struggle with the challenges of tests. Listen, dating correctly is a test for marriage. There should be a written test before you're allowed to have kids. But get a dog first at the very least. You know, we go over that in premarital counseling. If you ever do premarital counseling with me, you'll learn. You need a dog first, kids second. If you can't manage a dog, you can't manage kids. And you'll learn that you love a dog a lot more than your kids, so they act better. But tests are a part of life, and they're a part of life because God has something more for you. And until you have some tests, you can't really get there. James chapter 1, verses 2 and 4. Message translation says this: consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way. How many of you know there's a difference in maturity and age? You know what I'm saying? I know some Christians that have been saved for 25 years. And they've had the same experience for 25 years. That's not maturity in faith. That's not the purpose of the test. The purpose of the test is to continue to move you to the next level, to continue to push your faith and to challenge you. James 1 and 12 goes on to say this: anyone who meets a testing challenge head on and manages to stick it out is mighty fortunate. For such persons loyally love God. And the reward is life and more life. In the New King James Version, that same passage says it this way: blessed is the man who endures temptation. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Three things about tests I want us to really understand. Number one is that tests take us to the next level. But what's the next level? James chapter 1, verse 12 says it. It says that you're blessed when you endure temptation. And then once you endure it, you're now approved by God. And that you receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised. So you're blessed, you're approved, and you're living in the promise of God. We count it pure joy when we're challenged and tested, as Philip is here in this moment, because it's in that situation, it's in the passing of the test that we're blessed, approved, and living in the promises of God. That in and of itself is a miracle. We can live blessed and approved and in the promises of God. You see, tests move us from happiness to joyfulness. See, happiness is an emotional response, but joy is a spiritual quality. Happiness, as my pastor I grew up under used to always put it like this: happiness depends on what's happening to you. Joy is everlasting. Put it like this: happiness is defined by what happens to you, but joy is about what happens in you. It's in these tests that we find We're moved from happiness to joyfulness, the next level. The tests also move us from doubting to knowing. Sometimes in your life, you just gotta quit doubting, and you gotta start knowing. You've got to start hanging on to some truth of God's word. Doubt isn't a bad thing. We see doubt in the Bible, and God can use your doubt if you'll give it to him. But at some point in your life, you just have to say, I've seen enough, I've experienced enough, I've come through enough that I trust him. And I know he'll deliver me once again. He'll provide for me exactly what I need just one more time. And tests are the great reveal. That's the part we don't always love, right? I was watching a little, I don't know if it's YouTube or Facebook or some sort of social media type video. And it was a gender reveal party for a kid. And unfortunately, this gender reveal went about as bad as it could because the dad has a baseball bat and they're like throwing the gender reveal ball to him and he's supposed to hit it. And upon hitting it, it should explode with whatever the color of the baby, right? Pink for girl, blue for boy, just so we're clear on what that is. And nobody bothered to ask dad if dad could play baseball. And so they throw it and dad's like swing and a miss. And they throw it, swing and a miss. And they throw it, swing and a miss. Dad can't hit. Dad can't play ball. They're waiting to find out what the great reveal is in life. But when it comes to God revealing what's in our hearts, we're not sure we want the test because we're not sure that we want to have to acknowledge what's really inside of us. But it's in the test that we are blessed. It's in the test that we live in God's promises. It's in the test that we move from doubting to knowing. And here's my point. This is a proving ground for Philip. And if you're really technical, a proving ground is the name for a military installation where they're testing something, weapons or technology or tactics. And there's proving grounds all through Scripture. We see it at Mount Moriah where Abraham's faith is tested. We see it in the fiery furnace where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are tested. You've got an Egyptian dungeon that was the proving ground for Joseph. And Nehemiah, he was tested as a cupbearer before he could rebuild the great city and the walls that needed to rebuild. You see, all of these people had to endure test. I think about Nehemiah and I think about being a cupbearer, meaning he would drink from the king's cup first to see if it was poison, see if he's going to die. That's kind of a bad job if you really think about it. You know what I'm saying? One of the great tests of our individual lives is this. Can you do a good job at a bad job? Anybody ever had a bad job? Like the first job I had out of law school was the worst job in the world. Worst job you could ever have. Literally, I couldn't stand my life. I wondered why I went to law school. I was applying for jobs to not even be a lawyer. Like, I'll stock shelves at Walmart. Get me out of this. But can you do a good job at a bad job? I was taught that as a kid growing up. And so I did a good job at a bad job. And the day that I left that firm and moved to a different job, I got a bonus check. It's like, I quit. Why are you giving me a bonus now? But he told me, he said, you never laid down on me. I was committed to doing a good job at a bad job. You see, if you can't do a good job at a bad job, why is God going to give you a good job? That's the struggle of serving in church. Can I just tell you the truth of serving in church? Most of the jobs are bad jobs. But can you do a good job at it? Can you do a good job at a bad job? It's a great test that we all face at some point in our lives. And you see, every test is an opportunity for you to prove yourself to God. And it's an opportunity for God to prove himself to you. And when you view a test that way, you say, man, my God's faithful. And he's going to prove it once again. Pick it back up. It says, Philip answered. He answers Jesus. He's being tested, and he answers Jesus with this. 200 pieces of silver wouldn't be enough to buy bread for each person to get a piece. One of the disciples, it was Andrew, brother to Simon Peter, said, there's a little boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But that's a drop in the bucket for a crowd like this. Number 2, A miracle always begins with what you have. We all wish we had a little bit more, right? A little bit more money, a little bit more time, a little bit more patience, a little bit more joy, a little bit more happiness. But the miracles in our lives always begin with just what we have. 5 loaves and 2 fish. Not near enough, not a drop in the bucket to give everybody a piece of bread in the context of this story, but it's what they have. And when you begin to look at life like that, what you realize is that you always have more than you think you actually have. I go through this with my kids daily, right? Because I have 3, and they're way too close in age. It was a good season before they all got here. Now they're here. Reminisce on the good times of my life for a minute. Hope they come again. What happens is I set my 3 kids down for dinner. And inevitably one of them asks for something. So you go get that something for that one. And then what does the second one now want? Whatever the first one got. But you give the second one what the first one got. And you didn't give them as much. Or it's not as pretty, or doesn't look quite right. And then Ben's got to chime in because he has a voice now instead of knowing to just sit there and keep his dirty little mouth shut. So now he wants some. So you get the third kid some. And the third kid is now comparing their portion to the second kid and the first kid. So now the first kid thinks, well, they're complaining, and I took 3 bites of mine. Because it's always like chocolate cake when Dad's getting it for him, right? It's not like broccoli. So now Collier's eating half of his, and he's like, I didn't get as much as them. And he ate all the evidence for you to know if he's even telling the truth, right? So then you're like, I don't know, son. I'll get you some more chocolate cake over here. And then Ava's like, but I didn't get a second piece of chocolate cake. Are we going to run out? And then Ben will just like, put it all in his mouth because he's going to get a second piece of chocolate cake, guaranteed. It's a contest to see who has enough. I live my life like that sometimes, right? I see what someone else has, and I'm in this immediate moment of comparison. Look at how happy they look. It's Instagram. It isn't real, all right? People that tell you raising 3 kids is great are liars. Do not believe them. They're dirty scoundrels. When you wake up, though, and you realize, man, I've got just enough. I've got just enough. And I begin to realize how much I truly have. Go clean out your closet. Start cleaning your house up. And just realize how much junk you have. How much stuff you have. How much is really in your life. The same is true of our spiritual lives. If you'll really stop and pause and start making a checklist of gratitude for all that God has done and all that God has given you, you'll realize that you have far more than you thought you really had. I think my favorite part of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish is this, though. This little boy is who has 5 loaves and 2 fish. And at this point in time, he's not even important enough to be counted. He's not even one of the 5,000. He's relegated to such a low role in society that he isn't considered of value enough to count. We count every butt in a seat. You know what I'm saying? But at this point in time, that's not how it works. But that's who Jesus uses to feed the multitude. He uses the one that nobody else thought was significant. And for some of you in your life, here's if you just leave today with one thing, here's what I want you to understand. You're significant enough to be used by Jesus. Regardless of if everyone else around you says you count or don't count, Jesus says you do. And you can be used by him. And for some of us in the room, we need to start recognizing and acknowledging who God's trying to use to help us. Who God's trying to use to enter us into a new dimension or a new test. But we constantly play this game of when I get there. Well, I only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. If you'll give me 50 fish and 250 loaves, then I'll share. Then I'll be a part. God, listen, I only have a little bit. If you'll give me a lot, then I'll give. Can I tell you something about giving money and why it's important? It isn't because we need your money. We do, but that's not why it's important. It's important because think about what you spend the vast majority of your awake hours doing. Working. If you have a job. And so what you're doing is you're trading your time and your talent for your treasure. That's what work is, right? You're giving your time and your talent to someone else in exchange for a paycheck. When I give the first 10% to God, what I'm saying is I acknowledge all of the time and the talent you gave me. So therefore, I'm going to honor you with the treasure that I received for the time and the talent I gave to someone else. When you give your money, you're giving God your life. You're giving God this biggest portion of your life, the thing you do more than anything else. We don't come to church near as much as we go to work. Frankly, we're not at home and awake nearly as much as we are at work. The reason we give, but we play this game of like, but it's just not enough. What if the little boy says, yeah, I've got 5 loaves and 2 fish, but you can't have them because it's not enough? God, if you'll multiply it in my hands, then I'll share it. But Jesus says, well, you got to give it to me before I can multiply it. You got to give it to me before I can make something out of it. You have to give it to me before I can perform the miracle. It doesn't come the other way around. We have to stop playing the game of when I get there, it'll be enough. Jesus said, make the people sit down. There was a nice carpet of green grass in this place. They sat down, about 5,000 of them. Then Jesus took the bread and having given thanks, gave it to those who were seated. He did the same with the fish. All ate as much as they wanted. Can I just tell you, you're not going to receive a miracle until you become thankful for what you do have. It's in this moment that Jesus is thankful for what he has. He's thankful for the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And he trusts God so much that he breaks it, that he's willing to divide it so that God can multiply it. When we divide things in our lives and we give thanks for what little bit we do have, God always multiplies what we've given him. He always makes it more, and he always makes it something greater. I was reading in a pastor, he has really bad asthma, and he loves to run, and so he's been praying for years that God would heal him of his asthma. And he came out of a service one day, and he didn't need his inhaler the rest of the day, and he was feeling great about life. Right? Like, man, maybe God's performed a miracle in my life. And so he put it to the test, which is what you should do. Right? So he goes out for a 3-mile run. And he makes it about 1.5 miles, and he has a full-blown asthma attack. Dude's laying on the sidewalk. Can't breathe, can't do anything. Pulls his inhaler out of his pocket and starts taking the inhaler. He gets home that night, and he's journaling. And he's writing down all the things that he's thankful for, all the things that happened that day. And he titles it Inhaler. Because he's thankful for his inhaler. He's thankful for what he did have, and he's not frustrated by what he doesn't have. Can I be just real raw and candid with you guys for a minute? Going to 2 services has been the hardest thing we've done here for me. Because, I grew up Pentecostal, and when the room is packed wall to wall, front to back, everybody's smashed together, chairs are in, we're dragging chairs in. That's the greatest feeling for a pastor that you'll ever feel. Nothing better than the room full of people and all the voices are loud. People amen more, they worship more. They're with you more in a full room that's packed, man. You feel good, you stand on the platform. And I've been going through this struggle in my life, if I'm just being really honest, since we went to 2 of it's like, I'm not used to empty chairs anymore. There was a time when all the chairs were empty. And that's the hard part about it, right? Is I remember when all of the chairs were empty. That's what comes rushing back is they're all empty. And here's what really happens. When all the chairs were empty, I thought I was a failure. So that's the feeling that I have. And as I'm working through this sermon and I'm getting ready, it's one of those epiphany moments where you realize, okay, so if Jesus can take 5 loaves and 2 fish and he has to break it and give thanks for it, then the reason that we go from 1 service to 2 is because we're going to break it and we're going to divide it. So now are we going to be willing to give thanks for what little bit we do have so he can multiply it again? It's the question in all of our lives, right? Is are we going to take what we have and be willing to break it and give thanks for it so that he can multiply it and turn it into something great? I told you at the beginning of service, our numbers are up meaningfully. It just doesn't feel that way. But I think back to all the empty chairs, and I have to remind myself, man, he filled them. He filled them once. Why can't he fill them twice? Fill them twice, fill them 3 times. 3 times 4. Come on, as long as we're giving thanks for what we do have. The pastor gave thanks for his inhaler. He hadn't been healed of asthma, but he was thankful that he had been given a tool to survive. When the people had eaten their fill, he said to his disciples, gather the leftovers so nothing is wasted. They went to work and filled 12 large baskets with leftovers from the 5 barley loaves. The people realized that God was at work among them in what Jesus had just done. They said, this is the prophet for sure. God's prophet, right here in Galilee. So I'm just going to leave you with a question. If I can get you back, Greg. Where's your focus? Where's your focus? A few weeks back, Collier comes home from school, and he's always fretting about, but he's really fretting about this day, noticeably so. And so I take him in his room. I'm like, what's up, man? What happened today? He said, well, I got a 2 on an assignment. And I'm thinking, you got a 2 out of 100? We got something to work on. I didn't fully realize that they grade on a scale of 1 to 4. Okay, so a 2 wasn't as bad as I thought initially. But he was all upset because some other kids at his table got a 3. And he's supposed to get a 3 too. So I asked him one simple question. I said, were you focused on the test? He said, no. Comes by it honestly. He said, I was talking to my friends. Touche. So I followed up and said, listen, son, relationships are far more valuable than whatever was on that test. I didn't say that. That's not what I said. So I told him, I said, man, if you'll focus on what you should focus on, you'll get the result you want to get. See, Philip and Andrew, they're focused on 5 loaves and 2 fish. They're focused on the resource, not the source. They're focused on what is present in front of them, not the source of all provision, which is Jesus. They're focused on what little bit they have, not on the multitude that can be given by the one who is the creator of all things. See, the object of your focus always regulates the extent of your faith. Verse 14, they say, surely this is the prophet. Surely this is him. You see, that's always God's purpose. And that's the way that we should look at our lives. His purpose is to shine. His purpose is to be glorified. His purpose is to be acknowledged so that more people will see him. But when I focus on the fact that I don't have enough, I don't have enough friends, and I don't have enough money, and I don't have enough talent, and I can't sing well enough, and I don't like to worship that way, and then we shift gears and we start to focus on the source of all things. And we start to become thankful, and we start to say, hey, you can break it. And I'm going to be thankful for it so that you will multiply it. Two math problems, considered unsolvable, yet he solves them. If someone had told me that those were 2 famous unsolved problems, I probably wouldn't have even tried to solve them. George Danzig says he wouldn't have even tried if he would have realized how unsolvable the problems were. He wouldn't have put forth the effort or the time. He wouldn't have solved problems that we still use today to route air traffic and ships and cargo and oil refineries still used to this day. He wouldn't have even tried. If we could just bow our heads and close all our eyes. Just in a moment of reverence. If there's anybody in this room that is facing something that they say, I don't even want to try. I don't even want to try because I don't feel like I have enough. I don't even want to try because I don't feel like I can be thankful. I don't even want to try because I'm so focused on what little I have and not on how big my God is. If you would just slip your hand up, I just want to pray with you right where you are. I'm not going to embarrass you or call you out. Dear Heavenly Father, man, we thank you that you are always more than enough. And God, we thank you that you are capable in all circumstances and in all situations. And God, I ask that we would be thankful for everything that we have and that we would realize that we actually have far more than we think we do. That we're more talented than we think we are, that we're more capable than we think we are, that we're stronger than we think we are, that we have more wisdom than we think we have. And God, that we would look at you and understand that you are the provider of all things. And that we would be willing to be broken and divided so that you could multiply, so that you could make new, and so that you could make us whole and greater in all things. And God, we give you all of the praise and all of the honor. Let's stand to our feet. Let's sing this with Greg.